Hello and welcome to Sax Comprehensive. My name is Ken Gowdy and this is a saxophone course made for beginners. I've tried to cram in as much detail as I possibly could, things that I would have liked to have known when I started to learn to play the saxophone. So in the first hour we will deal with the technical stuff and the basics, and in the second hour we will do more practical stuff and learning how to read sheet music. If this type of content is something that you like, then make sure that you like, share and subscribe, and definitely subscribe if you want to be notified when I upload my next course. Thank you for watching and I shall see you soon. Adolphe Sax invented the saxophone in the 1840s. He designed several saxophones, of which 7 are common today: the E-flat sopranino, B-flat soprano, E-flat alto, B-flat tenor, E-flat baritone, B-flat bass and E-flat contrabass. Of these, the most well known are the soprano, alto, tenor and baritone. The good thing for the beginner about these saxophones is that they all use the same fingerings. So once you've learned to play one saxophone, it will be easy to play another since they use the same fingerings. The bad thing for the beginner is that the saxophone is a transposing instrument. In order to explain this, let's consider a non-transposing instrument like a piano. When any key is pressed on a piano, the pitch heard will be the same as the pitch as the name of the key pressed. So when a pianist hits the C key, the tuner will read C. However, transposing instruments work differently. When a saxophone player plays C by pressing the C key on an alto saxophone, the pitch heard will be an E flat and not a C. And when pressed on a tenor saxophone, the pitch heard will be a B flat. This is why the alto saxophone is often called an E-flat alto saxophone and a tenor saxophone is called a B-flat tenor saxophone. So we say that these instruments are transposing instruments since they transpose the notes fingered into a different musical key. This is not a problem when playing from sheet music, as the composer will write the music for each saxophone taking in mind that it transposes the sound, meaning that the composer will write the notes on the sheet music that will produce the notes he wants to hear. This means that there has to be a different sheet music for each type of saxophone. If a saxophone player were to play from the same sheet music as a pianist, then both instruments will be playing different pitches because both will be playing in different keys and the music will sound awful. This would also be the same if an alto and tenor player were playing from the same sheet music. So when playing in a band, each transposing instrument, including saxophones, would have to have their own sheet music so that they would all play in the same key. Usually, saxophone players can play by ear and know how to play a song in various keys, so they can simply play in the key that matches the other instruments. There were some saxophones made that did produce the same pitch like a piano, such as the C melody tenor and soprano, so in a household the saxophone could accompany the piano using the same sheet music. But these instruments were not as popular in a band setting, and so as time progressed they lost their popularity and few of them were made. Saxophones are considered part of the woodwind instruments and not the brass instruments in an orchestra because they use a reed to produce the sound, whereas brass instruments like a trumpet do not use a reed. All saxophones use the same fingerings, and because of this, the sheet music for all of the saxophones can be written on the treble clef only, the lowest note being the low B flat or low A for the baritone. However, as was said before, saxophones are transposing instruments, and because they differ in size, the range of the pitches heard of these instruments will be different. If the fingerings were named after the sound they produce, then not only would the fingerings have different names depending on each saxophone, but the sheet music would have to be written over a full musical staff. When buying a saxophone, it will usually come in a hard case, which is sturdy enough to protect the saxophone when carrying it around. We can get soft cases, but these are not recommended as they will not protect the saxophone from knocks. When we open the saxophone case, we'll find the main body of the saxophone with an end cap. There will be a saxophone neck. There will be a mouthpiece, ligature and mouthpiece cap. There will be a neck strap. There will probably be a small tube of cork grease. There may also be some polishing or cleaning cloths. There may even be some cleaning swabs. All of these items are necessary, so if we're missing any of these items, we'll need to buy them at some point. Another item that is very important is a reed. We cannot play the saxophone without a reed. And since there are so many different brands of reeds and of different strengths, it is most likely that we will not find one in the case, and so we'll have to buy one before we can play the saxophone. Some other items that you may want to buy in the future are a music stand and sheet music to play, a saxophone stand, a reed case to hold all of your reeds, a metronome and tuner to help you play in time and in tune, and some mouthpiece patches to place on the mouthpiece. Some other items that you may or may not want to buy later are gadgets designed to help us build our lung capacity, items to help develop our embouchure, an item to hear more clearly when we play, a microphone and audio interface for recording ourselves, a mouthpiece silencer for practicing mouthpiece exercises, a foot pedal to turn sheet music on an iPad or tablet. These are just some examples, but in fact there are so many different types of gadgets, each advertising to help us play the saxophone, that we need to be careful that we do not become collectors of gadgets which we will never use. If you want to know more about these items, you'll find reviews of them on my YouTube channel. More expensive items that some players have bought are saxophone silencers, so that we can play the saxophone and not disturb the neighbours. Obviously, each of these items would have their advantages and disadvantages, but let's look at the main items of the saxophone in more detail. When picking up the saxophone from the case, we should hold the saxophone by the bell, as this is the strongest and safest place to hold it. And if we have a saxophone stand, then we can place it on the stand while we attend to other things. If you pick up the saxophone by holding it from the body, as you can see, there are lots of rods connected to the body. These rods are delicate. If you apply too much pressure on your grip, you might bend them, and then the saxophone won't play as good as it could. So make sure you pick up the saxophone by holding it from the bell. The main body of the saxophone is made up of three parts. You have the bell, you have the bowl, which is the curved part, and you have the body of the saxophone, which has all of the keys. These three parts are soldered together and held together securely with a brace. If you look closely at the saxophone, you will notice that some of the keys are spring-loaded open, and when you press down the keys, they close, and some of the keys are spring-loaded closed, and when you press the keys, they open. If you buy your saxophone straight from the manufacturer, in order for these keys not to get damaged during transportation, what the manufacturer will do, he will put little bits of packaging under the levers to ensure that these keys remain closed during the transportation. So make sure that you read the instructions that is found within the case, because it will show you where these little bits of packaging are located, and then you can take them out in order to play your saxophone. If you bought your saxophone from a shop, then maybe the shop owner has opened up the case and checked it over to make sure that there's no damage and removed those little bits of packaging, and therefore your saxophone would be ready for you to play it. At the top of the saxophone is an end cap. The purpose of the end cap is to protect the octave pin, this pin that is sticking out when the saxophone is stored away in its case. If it were not there, then the saxophone will shake about in the case when transported, and the octave pin would hit the inside of the case and may bend. If this happens, then the octave mechanism would not work and would have to get the saxophone serviced. So don't lose the end cap, and always remember to return it to the saxophone when putting the saxophone back in its case. There are two screws at the top of the saxophone around the socket of the saxophone, one with a hole above it. The screw with a hole above it is for attaching a lyre, which is used for holding sheet music on a marching band. Since most people do not use it, manufacturers have come up with another use for this hole and have created a chunk of metal that can be placed there, or the screw can be replaced by a larger one. Manufacturers argue that having extra metal here would create more resonance and produce a better sound. However, all of the reviews for this product that I've seen, the reviewers state that they cannot tell whether there's any change to the sound. The other screw is for securing the neck to the main body of the saxophone so it does not move. Also at the top of the saxophone are these keys which look like hooks. They are called palm keys because we use our palm or side of the fingers to play them. If we have big hands, then we'd have to move our hands a greater distance in order to play them. So some will use palm key risers. We can buy rubber palm key risers which slip over the palm keys, but usually slip off when playing unless glued on. There are also some plastic palm key risers that can be glued on, or you can make your own. The good thing about making your own palm key risers is that you can customize it to fit your own hands. These are the palm key risers that are made for my saxophone. Some have also raised the side keys, but since I rarely use those keys, I've decided not to alter them. Lastly, some players have changed the right hand thumb hook. Either they've placed a rubber cushion over it, or they've changed it altogether for another hook that may be more comfortable. Saxophones are made of various materials, but are mainly made from brass, which as a material quickly tarnishes when exposed to air and changes colour. In order to keep the saxophone looking good and shiny for longer, lacquer is applied to it, which is a layer of paint. There are many different types and colours of lacquer, which manufacturers apply with different thicknesses. When sound is produced from a saxophone, some of that sound comes from the vibrations of the body of the saxophone itself. If lacquer is applied to the saxophone, then it will alter the natural vibrations of the saxophone. When any note is produced on the saxophone, that note is made up of many frequencies which we call overtones. The application of lacquer will alter these overtones, resulting in a slight change of tone. For this reason, some prefer to use an unlacquered saxophone. The unlacquered saxophone is polished and oiled, so it looks shiny and just as good as the lacquered saxophone. However, the unlacquered saxophone will quickly tarnish and change colour, which some like as it gives an aged vintage look, but also has the advantage that the brass will be able to vibrate freely. Different manufacturers use different materials in their lacquer and apply it with different thicknesses, but considering all these factors, which will have some effect on the tone, in a blind test, the difference in tone would not be detected, or at least not by the majority of players. When considering buying a saxophone, the choice of whether to have it lacquered or unlacquered should be made according to how you want the saxophone to look rather than how it affects the tone. Unlacquered saxophones cost more as they need to be polished and handled in such a way as to reduce the tarnishing until it reaches the shops, whereas lacquered saxophones can be wiped down with a cloth to maintain its look. Saxophones can also be plated with other materials such as gold, silver or nickel instead of a lacquer, and depending on the material may tarnish over time. These plated saxophones will obviously be more expensive. Saxophones are categorized as either student models, intermediate or professional. If you think you're going to play the saxophone for the rest of your life and make a career out of it, then an intermediate or pro saxophone should be bought, as this will save you money in the long term. If you're not sure whether a saxophone is right for you, then you can either purchase a student model, which would be a lot cheaper, or hire one. Buying a second-hand saxophone can be good as well, but you'll need a saxophone player to check it over to make sure that it's playable and not damaged in any way. Buying a second-hand saxophone online can be fraught with danger, as you do not know what you're getting until it arrives at your home. The difference between a student, intermediate or pro saxophone would be the quality of the materials used in the metal, the springs, the pads, etc. Intermediate and pro saxophones should have a better tone and the intonation should be better. They should also last longer with care. Student saxophones are made for the classroom, where they are expected not to be treated with the same care as a pro saxophone and are so built accordingly. Intermediate and pro saxophones would be built to a higher standard, such as in the way the posts are mounted or special features that will stop unwanted movement in the keys. The neck will have a piece of cork on the end. The reason for the cork is when you push the mouthpiece over the cork, it will become airtight. So you get a tube of cork grease, you smear it on the cork, and then you'd rub it in, which will make it smooth enough for you to push the mouthpiece over. The problem is, if you buy lots of different mouthpieces, then the hole in the end of the mouthpiece, the bore, are not all exactly the same size. So some mouthpieces will be tight, others will be loose. So for example, if I take this Jody Jazz mouthpiece and put it over this neck, it's tight here. And then obviously I'm going to have to turn it a bit to get it over. But then if I take this metal mouthpiece, this Fiorani Fire, and then you can see it just goes on quite smoothly. So if we usually play on a tight mouthpiece, this will eventually cause the cork to compress, and we will not be able to use a loose mouthpiece since it will not stay in the place where we want it. If a mouthpiece is loose, we can use PTFE tape, which is plumber's tape, to wrap around the cork. Once we slide the mouthpiece over it, it will smooth out the tape and become seamless. The disadvantage is that it's difficult to get off and we need to take it off with a razor blade. Alternatively, we could quickly dip the cork in a cup of hot water. This will cause the cork to expand, but if left too long in hot water, it will weaken the glue holding the cork to the neck and eventually lead to the cork being ripped when we push the mouthpiece over the cork. If the mouthpiece is too tight, we could get a technician to widen the bore of the mouthpiece, or we could use fine grade sandpaper to sand down the cork to fit the mouthpiece. If the cork is damaged and we get a technician to replace it, he will ask for the mouthpiece that we usually use so that he can shave down a new cork to fit the mouthpiece. We should never force the mouthpiece onto the neck, as it can cause the cork to come away from the neck, and we should only use cork grease when needed. Yamaha states that if we use cork grease too regularly, it can weaken the glue under the cork. Mouthpieces are made of all types of material: metal, plastic, hard rubber, wood, crystal, etc. However, it's not the material that affects the sound, but the design of the mouthpiece. If a metal and hard rubber mouthpiece were made exactly the same, there would be no difference in the tone. But because metal mouthpieces are usually designed differently, it is this that often attributes to the difference in tone between metal and ebonite mouthpieces. There are several things that we need to talk about when we refer to the mouthpiece and its design, all to do with how the air travels from the mouth to the neck of the saxophone. The first thing is the bore, which is the hole at the end of the mouthpiece which slides over the neck cork. This hole can be slightly bigger or smaller on different mouthpieces, resulting in a tight or loose fitting mouthpiece. Mouthpieces are identified by the branding name of the mouthpiece, its chamber size and its tip opening. The tip opening is given in numbers such as 4, 5, 6, etc. or letters A, B, C, and refer to how wide the gap is between the reed and the tip of the mouthpiece. Most mouthpieces will be made in various tip openings, while others may be made in only one size. This referencing guide varies between different manufacturers, so a 5 tip opening on one mouthpiece may be slightly bigger or smaller than a 5 on another mouthpiece. The larger the number, the wider the gap will be, and the more air the player can push through the saxophone, giving a bigger sound. However, having a larger tip opening can be more difficult to control, but as it gives the reed more space to vibrate, the player will find it easier to produce effects such as bends, etc. A smaller tip opening is easier to control and less air is needed to cause the reed to vibrate, but because the gap is small, if a lot of air is forced into the mouthpiece, the gap may close off, stopping the sound. Beginners would usually start off with a small tip opening, such as a 4 or 5 tip opening mouthpiece. Usually a harder reed is used with a small tip opening and a softer reed is used with a large tip opening. The baffle is the part of the mouthpiece inside under the beak that connects the tip to the chamber of the mouthpiece. If it's designed close to the reed, then it's called a high baffle, and if it's closer to the beak, then it's called a low baffle. High baffles make playing altissimo notes easier and contribute to a bright sound. Manufacturers have various designs for the baffle which affect how the air travels through the mouthpiece and ultimately the tone. They can be straight, stepped, rolled over, curved, and even have ridges. The baffle will also affect the resistance of the mouthpiece, whether it's more free blowing or not. The chamber of the mouthpiece is the space between the baffle and the bore. This can be large, medium or small. A smaller chamber contributes more to a brighter sound, but could produce a darker tone if matched with a particular type of baffle. Not all mouthpieces are made with the 3 choices of chamber sizes, and the design of the chamber can be different in different mouthpieces. The facing length is the distance from the tip of the mouthpiece to the point where the mouthpiece starts to curve away towards the tip. This can be long, medium or short, but most mouthpieces will be made with one length, so it's not really a factor in choosing the mouthpiece. The design of the baffle, the size of the chamber, and the tip opening all work together to determine whether the tone of the mouthpiece will be bright or dark. When comparing metal and ebonite hard rubber mouthpieces, metal mouthpieces are usually noticeably smaller. The difference is immediately felt when changing from an ebonite mouthpiece to a metal mouthpiece. An important item used with a mouthpiece is a mouthpiece patch, which is a small rubber sticky patch which goes on the beak of the mouthpiece to protect the mouthpiece from scratches and to protect the teeth. It would also lessen the sensation of the vibrating mouthpiece resting against the teeth. Mouthpiece patches come in different thicknesses and different colours. They can cause discoloration on the mouthpiece and can leave glue residue when removed. They will need to be replaced about every 1 to 3 months depending on how hard you bite, and definitely replaced before you bite through them. The sole purpose of the ligature is to hold the reed securely to the mouthpiece. The more the ligature allows the reed to vibrate, the more sound quality there will be. To this end, various ligatures have been developed, from those that make a lot of contact with the reed to those that make minimal contact. Ligatures are made of different materials, and depending on the properties of those materials, the reed will either vibrate freely or be dampened to some extent. Some of the materials used are various types of metal, leather, plastic, cloth or string. Some ligatures will have changeable plates, either made of the same metal with different contact points or made of a different metal. Some ligatures will have 2 screws, 1 screw or no screw to secure the reed. The way the reed is secured to the mouthpiece and the materials that the ligature is made of will have some effect on the tone, but in a blind test the audience will not be able to tell the difference between one ligature and another. When buying a ligature, consider how it looks, the ease of use and how securely it holds the reed rather than any claims made by the manufacturer. Reed performers are little stickers that can be placed on the bark of a reed to provide a flexible barrier between the reed and ligature. You'll have to try them to decide whether they really do as the manufacturer claims, such as extend the life of a reed by 2 on good dying reeds, etc. There are so many brands and types of reeds that it can be overwhelming when buying one. The 2 main types of reeds are cane reeds and synthetic reeds, although there are some reeds that are a combination of both. Reeds are categorized by their strength, meaning how easy or hard they are to play. There may be a number system where the lower numbers indicate that a reed is easier to play, or by the letters HMS for hard, medium and soft, or a combination of both. This grading system is not universal, and so a 2-strength reed of one brand may be a lot stronger than another brand with the same rating. For this reason, a player must consult a reed chart, which will give a genuine comparison between brands and between different cuts within a brand. Cane reeds are plant-based and as such are more fragile than synthetic reeds. The advantages of cane reeds are that they are cheaper than synthetic reeds and there are more choice of brands and cuts. They are also easier to customize through additional shaving and altering of the cane. The disadvantages of cane reeds are that they have to be moistened in order to play them. They usually need time to be broken in to make them accustomed to their new environment, and they are affected by the climate. Cane reeds are fragile, they last about 1 to 2 months with a lot of playing and can attract mold and fungus. They are also not consistent, meaning that the quality of the reeds within the box may vary. Cane reeds have different cuts, meaning that the cane is shaved away according to different designs. This would result in a different tone and different articulation. Filed reeds have more of the cane shaved away from the shoulder. Some reeds will be designed to have a thicker tip or a thicker bark. Some reeds are designed to have the heart of the reed either further forward or further back. The player would have to try the reeds in order to get a taste of what it is like to play them. Although cane reeds are expensive, it is a good idea to try several brands and cuts of reeds in order to find out which one works best with your mouthpiece. More synthetic reeds are being designed, and so the choice of reeds and cuts are growing. The advantages are that they do not need to be prepared, they are not affected by the climate, they do not need to be moistened, and they do not attract mold or fungus. They are easy to clean and are stronger than cane reeds. The disadvantage is that they are expensive. The price of one synthetic reed will cost about the same as a box of 10 cane reeds. However, synthetic reeds last longer, about 4 to 6 months, with a lot of use. When choosing a reed, the player will need to make sure that the reed is appropriate for the mouthpiece. Usually softer reeds are played on larger tip opening mouthpieces and harder reeds are played on smaller tip opening mouthpieces. Playing on the hardest reed is not always the best, as some may claim. We do not want to play on a reed that is too soft, and we do not want to play on a reed that's too hard. We want to play on the hardest reed that is comfortable for our embouchure strength, which will be different for everybody. Some professionals play on a strength 5 reed, while other professionals play on a strength 2 reed. The strength really depends on several factors. The beginner is advised to start on a reed strength of about 2 or 2.5. Whether a person plays on a cane reed or a synthetic reed is really down to preference. The audience will not tell the difference between them when hearing these reeds, but the player should be able to hear the difference and feel the difference. Whether that difference is good or bad is down to the individual. Because cane reeds are so fragile, it's a good idea to cover the reed with a mouthpiece cover to protect the reed when it's not being used. Mouthpiece covers come in plastic, metal or rubber and are also good for keeping the reed from drying out for a time. Some mouthpieces come with mouthpiece protectors which protect the surface of the table of the mouthpiece and the tip of the mouthpiece when it's being stored away. The neck strap that came with your saxophone will probably look like one of these, and if you're lucky, it will have some extra padding on the neck strap to make it more comfortable. The good thing about one of these types of neck straps is that once you connect the saxophone to it, it gives you a lot of freedom of movement. And it doesn't matter whether you're standing or whether you're seated, you've got a lot of freedom of movement. You can play with a saxophone at the side or in front of you. The problem with this type of neck strap is that the weight of the saxophone will pull down on the neck strap, causing pressure on the back of your neck, which can cause some neck problems for some people. And also because of the weight of the saxophone, the sides of the neck strap will pull in, creating pressure on the sides of your neck. And this can be considerable if you're using a larger saxophone like a tenor or bari. In order to solve the problem of the neck strap closing in on the sides of your neck, manufacturers have built neck straps with neck strap plates. So the plate will go here and it will keep the sides of the neck strap at a certain distance so that the neck strap cannot push in on the side of your neck. In order to stop the pressure on the back of your neck, manufacturers have built different types of neck straps that do not go around the neck but actually go onto the shoulders. These type of neck straps will have some form of metal bar encased in leather or plastic which will go over the neck but will not rest on the neck or the sides of the neck but rather on the shoulders. And these metal bars can be bent to be customized to the shape of your shoulders. If you're playing a larger saxophone like a tenor or bari, then you probably want to get a harness because a tenor and a bari are a lot heavier. So you have something like this which will go over the shoulders, but also there will be some straps which will go around the waist. Neck straps come with different regulators which operate differently and with different styles of hooks. Some hooks may be open while others closed, making them more secure. Some hooks may be covered in plastic so that they do not remove the lacquer from the saxophone ring. Saxophone stands are important as we can rest our saxophones on them while taking a break. Saxophone stands can be permanently mounted on a wall or floor mounted. Some stands fold away while others can be taken apart so it will fit within the bell of the saxophone so it can be carried in the saxophone case. Other stands are too large to fit in the bell and would have to be carried in a separate bag. Some stands can have pegs attached to them to hold other instruments. Some stands would have extra safety features such as the grabber stands in which the arms close in and grab hold of the bell of the saxophone. Others may have safety straps. Each stand would have its own advantages and disadvantages, so make sure that you do your research before buying one. We don't want the saxophone to fall off the stand with the slightest knock. So why should we clean our saxophones? Well, when you play your saxophone, what you're in fact doing is blowing warm air into a cold instrument. Now, when your warm air touches the inner cold surfaces of the saxophone, it creates condensation. It's just like when you're cooking in your kitchen and outside is cold, then the windows fog over, become wet, and you can actually write on the window pane, and if it continues, you'll see some streaks of water running down the window. This is exactly what happens inside the saxophone. The more you play it, the more the condensation builds up. It forms droplets of liquid, which runs down inside the saxophone and gathers at the bottom in the bell. You can actually see the buildup of condensation if you were to look down inside the bell. It gathers down at the bowl and usually at the end of the day we pour it out. This is how much condensation gathered in my saxophone after playing for 1 hour continually without any breaks in a cold room. This condensation is not pure water, but it's made up of various items. It contains part of your saliva which you've blown into the saxophone. In your saliva are the enzymes which are used to break down the food particles that gets trapped between your teeth. Also, these small food particles get blown into the saxophone, plus the dust that gathers inside your saxophone as you leave it on the stand. So all of these items become part of this concoction which runs down inside your saxophone. This becomes problematic when this condensation gets trapped between the pads and the tone holes, especially on the keys that are spring-loaded closed. If the pads get stuck, then pulling them apart can cause damage to the surface of the pad and even move the pad so it does not sit properly. Sticky pads are something that we all have to deal with, but what we need to do is to clean our saxophone before the pads become completely stuck. Otherwise, it can be costly to get a technician to replace a damaged pad. People have different types of saliva. For some, their saliva will cause more damage than for others. So some good advice is to brush your teeth before playing and do not eat or drink while playing, as the sugar in the drink and food will end up on the pad, causing them to stick. The keys that usually stick are the bis key, G sharp key, C sharp key and E flat key, but mainly the G sharp key and the C sharp key. If we notice that our key is beginning to stick, there are various things that we can do. The following tips you can try at your own risk. First, try cleaning the pad and the rim of the tone hole with a Q-tip dipped in water. Some players will use a Q-tip dipped in lighter fluid. The lighter fluid dries quickly and so may be better than using water. Some players will use lemon pledge on a cloth as it contains citrus to remove the grime and oil to lubricate the pads. The cloth can be placed between the pad and the tone hole, and with a gentle pressure closing the pad, the cloth can be pulled out. Some players will do the same but with a cloth dampened with lighter fluid. Some will pull out cigarette paper or normal paper between the pad and tone hole. Paper is not totally smooth and so will have some abrasion to remove the grime. Some will remove the key so that both the pad and the tone hole can be cleaned properly, as it's difficult to see and get access to clean when the key is still attached. When the pad and tone hole is cleaned, some will use powder paper to add some powder to the pad to remove any remaining stickiness. Powder paper can be used as an emergency since the powder coats the sticky grime and stops it from sticking for a time. But this is a short-term fix and can cause a mess inside the saxophone as the condensation washes away the powder. Lots of technicians suggest that powder paper should not be used. There are some products that are designed to keep the keys open when the saxophone is drying. That way there is less chance of the keys getting stuck when the condensation dries. But obviously keys can get stuck during playing. These products do not touch the level of the pad when it keeps the keys open, and as such do not damage the pad. So what is the bare minimum that we need to do in order to clean our saxophones? Well, first we need to dismantle it. So take off the neck, then take off the mouthpiece setup. I deal with this first, so I'm going to put the neck aside. Then I'll take off the ligature and then take off the reed. With the reed, it's got some of your saliva and your condensation on it, so all you need to do is either wipe it off with your fingers and then obviously wipe off the saliva on your trousers, or take a cloth, wipe off the excess saliva and condensation and put it back in its individual case, or if you got a reed container, then put it in the reed container, and that's done. The next thing is the ligature. The ligature is probably the cleanest thing, so just give it a wipe down, get off your fingerprints, and then you can put this away. To clean the mouthpiece, you basically take your small swab, take the string and push it down the bore, the hole that connects to the neck. Do not push it down the other side of the mouthpiece that goes in your mouth. The string always has to go through this side where the bore is. So push the string through there, feed it through, and then just pull the string through. Do this about 2 or 3 times to get rid of the condensation that's in the mouthpiece, and then get a cloth, clean the outside, get your fingerprints off it, and then the mouthpiece can be stored away. The neck will be filled with condensation, so you get your cleaning swab, which is the smallest cleaning swab. You take the string and you put it down the large hole of the neck, the part that goes on the main body of the saxophone. Just push the string in there, it will come out the end, and then you pull it through. You do that 2 or 3 times to make sure that all of the condensation that's inside of the neck has been wiped out. Then you get a nice soft cloth, wipe off the outside of the neck to get rid of the fingerprints, and then this can be stored away. You can leave it to air dry for a little bit to get rid of any remaining condensation that's in there, and then you can store it away in your case. Now, the main part is the main body of the saxophone, so be careful with this because it's heavy. You do exactly the same thing as you did with the neck, but this time you're going to use the larger swab. With the larger swab, the end on the string will be weighted. So in here is a piece of metal, so it's weighted. You drop it down the bell, keep on feeding it through, and then hopefully when you turn it upside down, the string, because it's weighted, will fall out of the saxophone, and then you just pull it through. Do that 2 or 3 times, and that will get rid of the condensation that's inside of the saxophone. Sometimes when you put the swab inside the saxophone and turn it upside down, maybe it doesn't come out. Like here, it's just got a bit here. It gets kind of stuck inside, maybe hit some of the tone holes and get bunched up inside. But maybe if you shake it like I did, it will come out and you can pull it through. If it's the wrong size swab and it gets stuck in the neck, then do not try and force it out, because some of these posts will actually protrude inside of the saxophone. You can actually look down in the socket and you can actually see bits of the posts inside of the saxophone, and if you keep on tugging it, you might dislodge these posts and then you'll have to get it serviced, get them resoldered, so you don't want to do that. So always be careful when you're pulling it through. If it gets stuck, try and push it back the way it came out and then take it out the bell and then get a better swab. I did have a swab before that kept on getting stuck in there, and so I changed it for this one, which goes through quite easily. I have had times when I put it in the bell, turned it upside down, and it's come out of the tone hole, and then obviously just be very careful. You don't want to damage the pad. Push it back in and then get it to go. If you turn the saxophone upside down so that it runs down the back side of the saxophone where there's less tone holes, you probably won't have any problems and it will just slide through. It won't hit anything, it will just slide through and you'll be able to pull it out easily. Next, get a soft cloth and wipe down the outside of the saxophone. What you're trying to do is to get rid of all of the fingerprints and the condensation that may have fallen on the outside of the saxophone. Sometimes when you're playing and the condensation gets to the tone hole, because you're playing the saxophone and these keys are opening and closing, it flicks the condensation out and the condensation lands on the outside of the saxophone, it lands on the keys. So some people playing within the first half an hour, they find that their fingers are getting wet. They have to keep on wiping their fingers. They're wondering, where is all this water coming from? It's because the condensation is coming onto the tone holes and dripping out on the saxophone. It really depends on what angle you're holding your saxophone will determine how much condensation will come out of the saxophone. But you don't want that condensation to go on the outside, because it can get into certain areas and cause the metal to rust. It can get onto the springs and cause the springs to rust. So you want to wipe it off and make sure it's nice and clean. Also, the oil from your fingerprints can cause the lacquer to fade. So if you want your saxophone looking as nice as possible, then obviously clean the outside with a nice clean cloth. Then put the saxophone back on the stand and leave it there to air dry for about an hour, and then you can put it back into the case. In addition to that, some people will use some pad savers or pad guards as they're called to try and get out some of that condensation that's still in there. You can get them in 4 different sizes for the 4 different parts of the saxophone. For the main body, the bell and the body of the sax, you get them for the neck and also for the mouthpiece. But I think if you're going to buy them, the 2 that's the most important would be these 2. And basically what they do, they got all these hairs on it, which actually will soak up any condensation that's still remaining on the sides of the saxophone. So you get this one and you put it down the bell of the saxophone, and that will stay in there and soak up the liquid. and this one will go down the body of the saxophone. So you just push it down the top and it just goes down and clicks in place, and that will stay in there. These hairs will actually protrude out into where the tone holes are and collect some of that moisture that's around there. Now, there are some controversy about its use. If you leave it in there, then it's going to cause a problem, because basically what it does, this will soak up the condensation, it will become wet. But if you leave it in the saxophone, then you're leaving in the condensation and that wetness in the saxophone, and it's not going to help. So basically what you should do is put it in there, leave it for a time to soak up the condensation, and then take it out, which would be damp. Store this away, and then leave the saxophone on the stand to air dry, and then put the saxophone in the case. Some people don't use it because they say that these hairs, when you put it into the saxophone, fall off and they land on the outside of the saxophone, and they get on the springs and they get around the tone holes and they stick to the saxophone, and they make the whole thing worse. So some people like it because it soaks up the condensation. Other people will not use it because they say that these hairs come off and get trapped in the saxophone, making the whole situation worse. But obviously you're going to have to try it for yourself and see if it's worth using these to get rid of the excess condensation. So that's the bare minimum that you want to do in order to keep your saxophone clean. But you've got to realize that these swabs are not going to take out all of the condensation that's in the saxophone. There are going to still be some places in the body of the saxophone where the condensation is still there, and later on that condensation is going to run down, especially around the tone holes. So what you could do for an extra clean is just get a piece of soft cloth and just get the corner of the cloth and stick it under the keys where the pads are, and then close the pads on the cloth and then remove it. You will see a little ring of condensation on the cloth because there's still that wetness there. So do that for some of the keys, especially the keys that are spring-loaded closed. So open them up and then put the cloth in there, close it, open it, and then take the cloth out, which will soak up some of that condensation. There are some products designed to do this, such as spit sponges. They are made of an absorbing material that are shaped to fit in a small space between a pad and tone hole. Later on, maybe after 2 weeks or maybe a month or so, you may notice that certain items of the saxophone are getting more dirty, and you may want to give it a deeper clean. Maybe you want to specifically clean the mouthpiece a lot better, or clean the reed a lot better to stop mold or bacteria building up on it. So there are various things that you can do. The instructions that I will give come from various sources and are where I clean my mouthpieces, but be aware that damage or discoloration can result from using the wrong method to clean your type of mouthpiece. You should always consult the official website of the manufacturer of the mouthpiece for their recommendations on cleaning. Hard rubber mouthpieces have been known to change colour from black to green due to the water temperature or the use of chemicals. First, we need to remove the mouthpiece patch if we use one. This may leave some glue residue depending on the quality of the mouthpiece patch. Good quality mouthpiece patches may not leave any glue residue, while cheaper patches may leave a lot of glue residue. Van Doren recommends rubbing cooking oil onto the glue to loosen it. A soft brush like a toothbrush can be used to gently scrub it. Do not use dissolvents or chemicals to remove the glue. Using a mouthpiece patch will leave a discoloration over time on the mouthpiece beak, but this may be removed through polishing if you later decide to sell the mouthpiece. When washing a mouthpiece, do not use warm or hot water on plastic or ebonite hard rubber mouthpieces, as the temperature can deform the mouthpiece and cause a discoloration on the mouthpiece. Scientists recommend cleaning their mouthpieces by wiping them with a soft cloth dipped in white vinegar and then rinsing the mouthpiece. The smell or taste of the vinegar will not last. Always be careful when cleaning around the baffle and facing of the mouthpiece. Van Doren recommend using gloves and washing the mouthpiece with a mild soap or neutral pH gel with cold water. If there is a buildup of calcium on the baffle, this can be removed with a soft brush like a toothbrush or a mouthpiece brush. Van Doren states that their mouthpieces can be dipped in white vinegar for not more than a minute to loosen the calcium. If the mouthpiece is dipped for longer than a minute, it can result in discoloration. To remove a stubborn buildup of calcium on the baffle, some players will leave a small cloth dipped in white vinegar on the baffle inside the mouthpiece to loosen the calcium while keeping the vinegar away from the outside of the mouthpiece to avoid discoloration. The mouthpiece should then be rinsed in cold water to remove all traces of oil and soap and then dried with a soft cloth. Some saxophone shops will sell a spray for cleaning mouthpieces. Lastly, mouthpieces should not be left in the sunlight, which can cause a discoloration, but should be stored in their pouches, which protect them also from UV light. Van Doren does not recommend storing a newly bought mouthpiece in the saxophone case for the first few weeks of purchase, and it should be stored away from silver. My ligature is a Van Doren Optimum ligature, which came with a golden foil bag. The instructions stated that the ligature should be stored in a foil bag to preserve its look. So once you have cleaned the ligature, make sure that you store it away to reduce the effects of tarnishing and staining. If the ligature is tarnished, then Van Doren states that a very soft polishing paste can be used to bring back the shine. However, harsh metal polish will permanently alter the surface treatment of the metal ligature. So it's best to maintain the ligature from the start and not wait until it tarnishes to such a state if you're concerned about its looks. When it comes to cleaning the reed more thoroughly, players have different ways of doing this. The first way is to store the reed in a container that is designed to prevent mold. For example, the reed case Rejuvenate has a sponge in the middle of the case which is supposed to be soaked in original Listerine mouthwash. This mouthwash does not contain sugar, so will not harm the reed and will kill the buildup of mold. It will also keep the reed wet and so prolong the life of the reed. Some players will use alcohol instead of the mouthwash. Some players will soak their reeds in a mouthwash for a period of time, but be aware if the mouthwash contains sugar or some other chemicals, it can harm the reed. Some players will store their reeds in a jar containing a little alcohol or a mixture of 50% water and 50% hydrogen peroxide. This keeps the reed wet and will kill the mold. Some players will dip the vamp of the reed into a small jar of alcohol for 5 minutes after playing and then will wipe off the alcohol and replace it back in its container. Some may soak the reed in a mixture of water and white vinegar, but this method might not be sufficient to kill the germs. Some players may use special sprays sold in music instrument shops. The most effective way would be to put the reeds in a glass of hydrogen peroxide until the bubbles stop, about 30 minutes, and then rinse off the reeds with cold water, then dry them and place them back in their individual containers. Hydrogen peroxide 3% food grade liquid has many purposes such as cleaning, mouthwash, tooth whitening, etc. and is safe around food, but always read the instructions. Reeds do not last long and really depends on how often they are played. They should be changed about every 2 months with a daily use, and because of this, some players may not give their reeds a deep clean since they will only use it for a short time. For example, Dave Sanborn, Eric Marienthal and others have mentioned in interviews that when touring and playing every day, they will just wipe off the excess saliva from the reed and place it back on a mouthpiece connected to the neck and wrap the whole thing in a cloth and put it in the bell of the saxophone. Dave Sanborn also wraps a mouthpiece setup on the neck in plastic. This acts like a humidifier which keeps the reed wet. Usually it is the wet condition that causes mold to grow, but I suppose if you play the saxophone every day, then the mold will not have time to grow sufficiently to cause harm before the reed is thrown away. Some people get sick, which they attribute to the reed, while others don't get sick. You'd have to decide whether you want to give your reeds a deep clean or not, depending on how often you play them and how long they last. Once Dave Sanborn decides on a reed to play, he will keep that reed on the mouthpiece and will only play that reed until it dies. He said that he had kept a reed on the mouthpiece for 3 months before it died. The problem with beginners is that they do not hear when the reed dies and therefore may play on a reed for up to a year since it still makes a noise. Under these conditions, that reed would definitely need several deep cleans. After some time, there will be a buildup of dust and grime in places around the saxophone that are hard to clean, such as around the tone hole and springs. You can either send the saxophone to a technician for cleaning or for an overhaul, or you can do it yourself. This would involve taking off all the keys, cleaning the saxophone, oiling and greasing it, and reassembling it. With an overhaul, technicians would also replace the corks, the felts, and replace any damaged pads and test it, correcting any faults. This can be expensive. My local saxophone superstore quoted a price of £370 with additional costs for every pad replaced. For this reason, this is usually only done when a major fault occurs or many years after purchasing the saxophone. Some players would have a service every year and an overhaul around every 10 years. When playing the saxophone, we use our diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped muscle, to expel air from our lungs, which travel up into our throat. The air travels through our vocal tract, into our mouths, through our lips, into the saxophone. So there are three areas that we want to concentrate on. We want to concentrate on our breathing and lung capacity. We want to concentrate on our throat to make sure that there's no constriction there. And we want to concentrate on our embouchure to make sure that we are producing the best sound possible. There are various exercises that you can find online that will help you control your breathing and expand your lung capacity. Because basically, the diaphragm is a muscle, and you know if you exercise muscles, you can make them stronger. And so by doing these various exercises, you can increase your lung capacity, which means that you can hold more air in your lungs when you breathe in and therefore expel that air for longer or with more force. One such exercise is to breathe in through your nostrils and then purse your lips as if you're blowing out through a straw and blow that air out. Now, for whatever count you get for breathing in, blow the air out twice as long. So if you breathe in and it takes the count of 5, then blow that air out for the count of 10. And what you really want to try and do is blow out all of the air that's left in your lungs. You want to get rid of all of that trap air and stale air and try and expel all the air out so that when you breathe in again, you can fill up your lungs with clean air. You could do this exercise sitting down with a good posture, but it would be better if you lay down on your back on the floor. That way you'll mainly be using your diaphragm and not these other muscles that help you to breathe when you're standing up. When you're lying down, make sure you're in a relaxed position. So either have your legs stretched out or bend them at the knees, or even put a cushion under your knees to support your legs. And then breathe in through your nostrils for a certain count, and then expel all of that air out of your lungs. It should be at least twice as long as what you took to breathe in. To make it a little bit more difficult, you can add some resistance by placing a heavy book on your stomach. And then as you breathe in, watch your belly extend. And then when you breathe out, concentrate on expelling all that air and watching your belly or feel your belly move back in. You don't want to breathe from your chest. You want to be breathing from your belly. In order to allow the air to flow freely from our lungs into the saxophone, we need good posture. So if standing or sitting, make sure that the back is straight and not slouched over, and that the head is looking straight forward and not bending down or looking up. If the head is bent down or looking up, it will constrict the airflow in the throat. There are many different types of embouchure used by saxophone players, but the most common is shown in this diagram. There are several things to note. The bottom lip is curved slightly over the lower teeth. If we pronounce the letter V as in victory, V, we will feel a little of the lower lip move briefly over the lower teeth. We can use this as a guide as to how much lower lip is needed. The lower lip acts as a cushion for the reed to vibrate against, and the lower teeth as a pivot point. The position of the lower teeth is at the point where the reed begins to move away from the mouthpiece. The top teeth are placed on the top of the mouthpiece, usually on top of a mouthpiece patch. Then the lips are closed around the mouthpiece to create an airtight seal. the corners of the lips are pulled in. If there is too little mouthpiece in the mouth, then the point at which the reed will vibrate will be further forward and the bottom lip will dampen the sound. This method is sometimes used to produce subtones, which are notes in which the higher overtones are dampened. If too much mouthpiece is placed in the mouth, then the reed will vibrate further back and create a buzzing sound as the reed vibrates against the mouthpiece table. We need to experiment with the position of our embouchure until it creates the best sound. Another type of embouchure is called the double lip embouchure, in which both the upper and lower lips are curved slightly over the teeth. This embouchure was used by John Coltrane, the tenor player. The advantage of this type of embouchure is that it's harder to bite down on the mouthpiece, which is a common problem with beginners. It is also possible to play with an embouchure without the lower teeth, with the reed being supported by the lower lip only. Creating a good embouchure will take some time as our embouchure strength improves, so the beginner should choose one type of embouchure and stick with it, the most common form being probably the best to start with. Before we can talk about setting up the saxophone, we need to talk about reed preparation. This only applies to cane reeds, as synthetic reeds do not need preparation before playing. Different saxophone players would have their own ritual of reed preparation in order to get their reeds to play in a way that is best for them. Cane reeds need to be wet to some degree in order to play. Some players like their reed to be very wet, while others like them on the dry side. We can either wet the reed with our saliva or with water. Saxophone players would have their preference. Also, some will wet only the vamp part of the reed, while others will wet the entire reed. To wet the vamp part of the reed with our saliva, we just put the vamp in our mouths for about 10 seconds or more. We can turn it over so that the other side of the vamp is also wet. If we want to wet the entire reed with our saliva, we would simply turn the reed around and put the bark part of the reed in our mouths as well. To wet the vamp part of the reed only with water, we partially fill a glass or jug with water and place the reed on the side of the container so that only the vamp part of the reed is in the water. The reed should stick to the side of the container if the container is large enough. To wet the entire reed, we'll simply place the entire reed in the water. With practice, we'll know how long to wet the reed for the desired effect. If the reed is stored in a special reed case that keeps the reed wet, or in a jar with some little liquid, such as water, alcohol, or mouthwash, then the reed will already be wet when we take it out of the case or jar, and so we would not need to go through this process. In fact, many believe that the process of wetting the reed and then allowing it to dry out in its individual case would damage the reed and shorten the lifespan of the reed. So most would use a system that would keep the reed from drying out. If it's the first time using a cane reed, many believe that the reed should be broken in. So after wetting a reed, the player would play on it for about a minute the first day, 2 minutes the second day, 3 minutes the third day, etc., and maybe only for 10 to 20 minutes after the first week. This is done to gradually get the reed used to the forces that we apply to it, so as not to damage the fibers of the reed. Some will polish, sand, or shave the stock part of the reed so that it becomes flat. Some players will rub their fingernail gently over the vamp in order to close the pores of the reed. A reed is like a bunch of straws glued together so air can travel through it. By rubbing our fingernail over the vamp, we close the air passage in the reed, which some believe will make the reed play better. David Sanborn has a 3-week breaking in process before he uses any of his reeds in a gig. This is what he does based on an interview. David Sanborn uses Van Doren V16 reeds. He takes them out of their individual cases and put them in a jar filled with warm water and soak them for about 2 hours. He then puts the reeds back in their individual cases and put them back in a sealed jar with a little bit of water to keep the moisture in there. Every day he takes them out of their cases, rubs his finger over them to remove the pulp, washes them and put them back in their cases and put them back in the sealed jar. Every few days he will put a little water in a glass and put only the tip of the reeds in the water and let the bark dry for 45 minutes. He uses a reed whirl to do this. He will then play on the reeds and number them according to how good they play, number 1 being the best. The numbering may change as the reeds begin to be broken in. Then after 4 weeks, the reeds will be broken in and ready for him to use in a gig. He will take the best reed and play on that reed every day until that reed dies. Then he will take the next best reed and play on that. While doing this, he would prepare another batch of reeds so they will always have a stock of prepared reeds. Some players will play their reeds in rotation. They will store their reeds in a reed case and will play a different reed every day in rotation. This could be 3 reeds in a rotation or even more. This will give the reeds a rest when not being played, and so all the reeds would last longer. Some players will not break in their reeds as they do not want to go through this long process, nor would they play their reeds in rotation. When setting up the mouthpiece, we can either start with a mouthpiece connected to the neck, which some people like, as it gives them something more to hold on to, or we can just start with the mouthpiece only. If using cane reeds, then these reeds must be wet with whichever method we have chosen to use. One of the good reasons to wet the reed, the vamp and the bark, is that the saliva on the bark causes the reed to stick to the mouthpiece. This will create an airtight seal between the reed and the mouthpiece and will help when putting the reed in the correct position, as the reed will not easily slide about on the mouthpiece and will stay in position while we make any final adjustments. There are two ways of putting the reed on the mouthpiece. We either put the reed on first or the ligature first. If we start with the reed, we need to line up the reed with the rowels of the mouthpiece. The reed must be parallel with the rowels and in the center of the rowels. The reed must not be leaning to one side or the other. The tip of the reed must also be in line with the tip of the mouthpiece, or better, slightly below the mouthpiece, so that we see a little line of the mouthpiece showing behind the reed. The tip of the reed should never be above the mouthpiece. Once we line up the reed roughly in place, we can slip the ligature carefully over the reed and mouthpiece and loosely secure it in place. We can then make any further adjustments if the reed has moved out of position, and finally tighten the ligature. It may be easier to see where the tip of the reed should be when making final adjustments if we press down the reed with our thumb so that the tip of the reed touches the mouthpiece. It is good to take your time when setting up the mouthpiece and getting the reed in the correct position, as this will affect your sound, even if it means starting again from scratch. There are various positions for the placement of the ligature. If the mouthpiece has a ligature line, then place the ligature behind that line. If not, then we'll have to judge where will be the best place to set the ligature. If the ligature is placed a little forward, that would increase the resistance of the reed. If the ligature is placed further back, it will lower the resistance of the reed and may create a buzzing sound which some players like. The main problem with setting up the mouthpiece this way is that when we're sliding the ligature over the reed, we might accidentally hit the tip of the reed with the ligature. If this happens, then the reed will probably split and be damaged. This situation usually would not happen, but could happen if we were setting up the mouthpiece in a dark hall. The other way of putting the reed on the mouthpiece which avoids this is to start with the ligature. We slide the ligature over the mouthpiece and hold it a little forward so that we can slide the reed under the ligature bark first. This way we keep the tip of the reed away from the ligature. We can then slide the ligature further down and adjust the reed to the correct position and tighten the ligature. I find that the reed first method is the quickest, while the ligature first method is more clumsy. Some mouthpieces would have their ligature screwed to it. Once the ideal position is found for the ligature and fixed in place, then the ligature will always be in the same position every time when setting up the mouthpiece. Some players will do a pop test in which they'll place the mouthpiece setup on the palm of their hands and suck the air out of it. The mouthpiece reed will close the gap, and when removed from the mouth, we will hear a pop when the reed releases. This means that there is a good seal between the reed and the mouthpiece. If we started without the mouthpiece connected to the neck, then we'll need to connect it. So apply some cork grease to the neck if needed and smear it in. Then with a twisting motion, slide the mouthpiece over the neck, roughly about a third to a half in. We'll make final adjustments later when we tune the saxophone. It should look like this. To connect the neck to the body of the saxophone, take your neck, put it in the socket with a twisting motion, and then line it up and then tighten the screw just enough so that it doesn't move. You do not want to over tighten it, as you could damage the thread. We label our fingers 1, 2, 3, with 1 being the index finger and the thumb and pinky finger. The keys of the saxophone may look different on different brands of saxophones, but they are all in the same position, and so we should be able to locate where to place our fingers. The left hand fingers are placed here, while the pinky finger rests anywhere on the pinky table and will move to press any of the 4 keys when required. The left hand thumb rests on the thumb rest a little over the octave key, so it can be rolled to press down the octave key when needed. The right hand fingers are placed here, while the pinky finger rests comfortably on any of the 2 keys. The right hand thumb is placed under the thumb hook. The fingers resting on the saxophone should be curved and not straight. So when you put your neck strap on, make sure you adjust the regulator so the neck strap is at the right height. Either push the regulator down so the saxophone will drop down, or pull it up so that the saxophone will lift up, to make sure that when you put the mouthpiece in your mouth, it's at the correct height. You want to make sure that when you put the mouthpiece in your mouth, that your embouchure creates the right embouchure. If the saxophone is too high, then obviously it's going to push your head back. You won't have the correct embouchure. If the saxophone is too low, you're going to have to lean forward and you're going to constrict the airflow in your neck. So make sure you adjust the regulator on the neck strap. Also, make sure that the saxophone is not low and that you have to lift the saxophone up with your thumb under the thumb hook. Some people adjust it and the neck strap is too low, and what they do, they lift the saxophone to the right height by using their thumb. If you do that, you're going to hurt your thumb. You may pull a nerve, trap a nerve, or pull a muscle, whatever. But I have done it myself. It hurts and it takes a few weeks to heal. So you won't be able to practice your saxophone for a few weeks. So make sure you don't lift the saxophone up with your thumb. All your thumb is doing is keeping the saxophone steady and pushing the saxophone away from your body to make sure that your embouchure is correct with the mouthpiece. If we examine this picture of Gerald Albright, we can see that he has good posture. He is standing straight with his head looking forward, not bent up or down. His wrists and hands are in a straight line with his forearms. His shoulders are down and relaxed, and he is overall in a relaxed position. So what we want to do now is to play our first note. So what I want you to do is, without pressing the octave key, just press down 1, 2, 3. Forget about the right hand, just in the left hand, 1, 2, 3. That will give you G, and then blow and see what happens. It should sound something like this. Now, if no sound came out of your saxophone, there could be various reasons for this. Maybe your reed is too strong for your embouchure. If you're a beginner, you should be playing on a reed strength about 2, 2.5. You could even go a softer reed, such as 1.5. You definitely do not want to be playing on a 3 or above, because that's going to be too strong for your embouchure. It's going to take you some time playing the saxophone for the muscles around your lips to get stronger and to build up the strength of your embouchure. So you should be playing on around about a strength 2. If it's stronger, then it's going to be harder for you to make a sound. Another reason why you might not be getting any sound is because your embouchure is too soft. So when you put your embouchure around the mouthpiece, if you're not applying enough pressure and your embouchure is loosely around the mouthpiece, again, your bottom lip is just going to act as like a cushion. It's going to dampen the sound, and it's going to be difficult for you to produce a sound. So what you want to do is to apply more pressure by closing your mouth a bit more around the reed, and that will give the reed something to vibrate against and help you to produce a sound. Another reason why you might not be getting any sound from the saxophone could be because you're not blowing enough air through the saxophone. The saxophone is a loud instrument. It requires a lot of air. And if you're just blowing lightly through the saxophone, it may not be enough to get the reed to vibrate. So blow a strong amount of air into the saxophone, get that reed vibrating to produce a sound. I think as a beginner, you should be trying to get a loud sound to come out. And then once you get the sound coming out, you can reduce the amount of air that you're pushing through the saxophone, which will reduce the volume to an acceptable level. Another thing that could happen is when you're trying to produce that low G, the G above that actually sounds. So instead of you getting this note, you get this note. If you get that higher note, it's probably because you're applying too much pressure to the reed. So when your mouth is around the mouthpiece, you're biting down, you're clamping down, you're applying too much pressure, which causes the note to jump an octave above. So now that we're getting that low G to come out, what I want you to do now is just to press down without the octave key 1 and 2, just 1 and 2, and that will give you A. And then play the G and then the A and then back to the G. So you're going to be doing 1, 2, 3, blow that, and then you're going to go 1, 2 and blow that. And then what I want you to do is just press down 1, and that will give you B. And then play G, A, B, and then go back down again. Then the last thing I want you to do is to do the same thing, but this time press down the octave key, which will give you those notes an octave above. So start without the octave key and then do it with the octave key and see if you can do that. So now that we're beginning to play some notes on the saxophone, the next thing that we need to discuss is tuning, because we don't want to play notes on the saxophone and those notes be out of tune. So how do we tune the saxophone? Well, to be able to play in tune depends on various factors. And the first thing that we need to consider is tuning the saxophone. When you first assemble your saxophone, the body of the saxophone will be cold. So if you touch it, you feel it, it feels cold. If you play on a cold saxophone, the pitch of the notes will be a little flat. And as you continue to play on the saxophone, your warm air will warm up the saxophone. And as the saxophone becomes a little bit warmer, then the pitch of those notes will rise slightly. So what we usually would do is to get our saxophones, we would practice on it for a little bit of time, and then once the saxophone is warmed up, then we would tune it. Because if we tune it at the beginning and start playing on it, once the saxophone warms up, we'd have to tune it again because all the tuning would have changed. So how do we tune a saxophone? Well, the only way you can tune a saxophone physically is by moving the position of the mouthpiece on the neck. If you push it in, you're actually making the tube smaller and the notes will go higher. If you pull the mouthpiece out, you're making the tube longer and the notes will go down. So basically what we would do, we would play a note, we'll look at a tuner and see whether the notes coming out of the saxophone is correct. And if it's not, we would adjust the mouthpiece, either pushing it in or pulling it out until it reads the correct pitch on the tuner. As you know, saxophones are transposing instruments. So the note that we finger on the saxophone will be different than the reading on an ordinary concert pitch tuner. So for an alto saxophone, if I was to finger an F sharp, then on the tuner, I would expect it to show me A. And if I fingered an F sharp on a tenor saxophone, I would expect it to read E. So usually when we're tuning the saxophone, we would finger an F sharp. And in the case of this alto saxophone, I'll look at my tuner and see if it reads A. If it reads A and it's too sharp, the needle is not in the center, it's too sharp, I'm gonna pull the mouthpiece out. If I look at the tuner and it's saying that it's flat, then I'm gonna push the mouthpiece in. To raise the pitch until the tuner tells me it's dead in tune. Once you've tuned the saxophone by fingering F sharp, then press the octave key and see if it's still in tune. It should still be in tune. Some beginners will tune their saxophone and get their mouthpiece in the correct position and then get some form of marker and mark the neck at the position where the mouthpiece is, so that every time they set up their saxophone, they could push their mouthpiece to that marking and it will be in tune. But this is really not correct. It really does depend on the temperature of the room. If the room temperature is the same as when you set up the saxophone, then it will be in tune. However, if you go away and play in another hall and the temperature of that hall is warmer or colder and you push it to the marking, then obviously your saxophone is not going to be in tune. So really you're going to have to tune it every time when you set up the saxophone. And the marking may be used as just like a guideline. Really, as a beginner, you're only going to tune the saxophone if you're playing with other instruments or you're playing with a backing track. If you're not playing with other instruments and you're not playing with a backing track, you could just put the mouthpiece on and start learning your scales and learning some songs. But then in order to sync your saxophone with other instruments so everything is playing in tune, you're going to have to tune your saxophone. Most of the keys on the saxophone press straight in. So the way you play these keys, put your hands in the normal resting position as explained, and then only press down the keys that need to be pressed down. The other fingers should stay in their normal resting position, resting lightly on the keys. Now this is extremely difficult. When you start to play the saxophone, you're going to find that your fingers will rise up off the keys. And you'll actually, if you watch professionals, they do the same thing. Their fingers are moving all over the place. I've seen people play with their little pinky finger over here, and then when they want to press down the key, they'll move it back onto the table. But ideally, the way you want to try and learn how to play is to keep your fingers glued to the pearls. Like I said, it's going to take you a long time of practice trying to do this because your natural instinct is to move your wrist and to move your fingers off the keys. The whole idea about it is that to be very proficient in playing the saxophone, you want to make as minimal movement of your fingers as possible. If playing the saxophone you move your fingers high up in the air, then it means you're going to have to move them all the way back down again. It takes time to do that, whereas if your fingers stay on the keys, then you're doing as minimal movement as possible, which theoretically means you're able to play the saxophone quite faster than if you're moving your fingers all over the place. On the side of the saxophone, we find these 3 side keys. In order to play them, keep your hand in the normal resting position, and then with the side of your index finger, you're going to push those keys in. It may be difficult at first to make sure that you're actually pushing in the correct key, because these keys are kind of small, and when you push them in you may find that you're pushing down also another key by mistake. So it's going to take you some time to practice pushing in these side keys. There are some notes in the super high register, the altissimo range, where you can, in some of the fingerings, press down 2 of these keys at the same time. So your index finger will be right in the groove between the 2 keys in order to push them down at the same time. But for the beginner, the main keys that we will be pressing down will be the bottom side key for A sharp and B flat, and the top side key for high E, F and F sharp. At the top of the saxophone we have this little key here which is called the bis key. Remember when we played the G, we had 1, 2 and 3 to play the G. Well, between 1 and 2 there is a small little key called the bis key. This bis key is never pressed down by itself. You always press down this bis key with the B key. So if your finger is slightly extended over the B key, you're able to press down the B key, and then you're able to roll your finger to also press down the bis key. So by rolling your finger, you're able to play a B, then roll it to press down also the bis key to play B flat, then you can roll it back just to play the B key. Usually when playing scales with B flats in it, we keep our finger over the 2 keys. So it's always in the middle of the B and the bis key, and when we press down the B key, we always press down the bis key, and we leave it down when we're playing some other notes. So for instance, when we're playing A flat, you may see it, the notes in the pictorial form as 1, 2, 3 and the A flat key or G sharp key, but also if you look at it, the bis key is also down, because when you press some of these other keys, it also brings the bis key down. So since the bis key is already down, we could keep our finger on the bis key when moving from the B flat to the A flat. And so usually when playing scales with B flat, we just keep our finger on that and just imagine that these two keys are stuck together, and every time we're playing that and we're playing some other notes like A flat or E flat, the bis key is pressed down with the B key. That way it stops us from having to roll our fingers backwards and forwards. It's just a little tip when playing scales with B flat in it. At the top of the saxophone we have these three keys which are called palm keys, and we play them with the side of our index finger and with the side of our middle finger. If you look at the keys, they're not so much activated by pushing them in, it's more like pulling them down, because they're on this kind of like toggle basis, so you actually pulling them down to open up the keys. So with your hand in your normal resting position, this is the D key. So if I use the side of this index finger, I can pull the key down to open it. So what you're supposed to do is keep your fingers on the pearls and then pull that key down to open it. Now, if you've got big hands, when you try to pull this key down, you might not be able to do it. Your hands may have to come off the pearls. So on my saxophone, I have these palm key risers which extend the keys out. So when I have my fingers on the normal keys, then the palm keys are close to my fingers, so I can actually, let's see if I can show you. They're close to my fingers, so I don't have to move my fingers a great deal to actually start activating the key. So to get D, I'll just push down this key or pull down this key with the side of this index finger. Then to get E flat, which is the next note above, I need both of these two keys, the D key and the E flat palm key, pulled down at the same time. So using this same finger, the index finger, with my hands in the normal position, I pull down both of the keys together at the same time. The next note up would be E. So what I'm going to do is pull down these two keys together at the same time, and also the side key at the top, I'm going to push that in as well. So there's three notes being pushed in at the same time. So I'm pushing in this side key at the top and I'm pulling down the top two palm keys. That will give me E. Then to get F, I need to pull down the third palm key, and I'm gonna pull that down with my middle finger, and I'm also going to push in this side key. So all four keys are pressed down. Then to get F sharp, if you got a saxophone which has an F sharp key, which is this kind of long key here, you press all of the keys that you did before, but also you press down this. And in order to do that, you can use this finger here. So I'm pressing down this key with this finger, I'm pressing in this side key with the side of my index finger, and I'm pulling down the three palm keys. So all of those together would give me F sharp. Before we play any scales on the saxophone, we need to talk about intonation. Intonation is different than tuning. When we tune a saxophone, we move the mouthpiece up and down the neck until we tune the saxophone overall. When we talk about intonation, we're talking about every individual note on the saxophone and how they play and whether they're in tune or not. Most people find that when they start playing scales and they start in the lower register, so starting with the low notes moving up, they're more or less in tune, maybe one or two, maybe a little flat. But as soon as you press that octave key and you move into the second register, lots of people find that the notes become a little sharp. And as you move up, the notes become sharper and sharper. And then when you get onto the palm keys, lots of people complain that the palm keys are way out of tune. Now, if we were to check each note, we'd first have to make sure that the tuner is set to 440 Hz. All band members would have tuners set to 440 Hz. The tuner shows the accuracy of the notes measured in cents. There are 100 cents between one note and the next note a half tone away. If the needle reads 0, then we are in tune. If it reads 4 cents off, then that would not be too bad, as many people would not notice. If it's more than 10 cents out, then it will be noticeable and we'll be playing out of tune on that note. But depending on the song, it might not matter. For example, playing out of tune while playing the blues may not be noticeable. Obviously, if everybody in the band was playing out of tune and we were the only person playing in tune, then we will stick out from the rest as being off. The ear generally tolerates notes being sharp than being flat. It has also been said that great players like Charlie Parker often played sharp. Now, if the needle is on the plus or minus 50, then what we are doing is playing a sound between two notes. So if we were playing E and the needle was on plus 50, then we would be halfway between E and F. There are various things that affect our intonation. Number 1, gear. Modern saxophones are designed with the aid of computers and as such have a better intonation, that is, most of the notes would be in tune. However, some do not like the tone of modern saxophones. Vintage saxophones may have a nicer tone, but often have intonation problems since they were designed by trial and error. The height of the tone holes can affect intonation. How high the keys open can affect intonation. The neck, the mouthpiece and the reed will also affect intonation. And also the working condition of the saxophone. We can give our saxophones to a technician in order to make them better, but the truth of the matter is some saxophones have better intonation than others. The other thing that affects intonation is us. Our embouchure and the position of our throat and tongue will affect intonation. If there are a few notes out of tune, then we must not use our lips to correct this, but rather the position of our tongue and throat. If we use our lips to correct the intonation, then the tone quality will change. However, if we cannot correct the pitch by adjusting the position of our tongue or throat, then we can simply use a different fingering that plays the note a little sharper or a little flatter. A professional will play long tone exercises and mouthpiece exercises in order to be able to correct the pitch of the saxophone. A professional will also try to keep the tone the same throughout the ranges of the saxophone. For example, we may notice a change in tone when we move from playing a note that has a few keys closed to one that has lots of keys closed. I will now show you the fingerings for the C major scale over the entire range of the saxophone, and afterwards you can play along with a metronome to a finger chart for all of the major scales. You may have to slow the video down to do this. I will not change my embouchure when playing the C major scale, so we can see the intonation of my horn and its setup without any compensation by changing the tongue position or throat position. Watch the tuner to see how my notes vary in and out of tune when I keep my embouchure the same. So if you decide to play a scale with a tuner and your notes are out of tune, then welcome to the world of the saxophone. So the first phase of playing the C major scale, we're going to start off with low C. And that is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the bottom pinky finger goes on the bottom of these two keys. And from there, we're just going to remove the lowest key one at a time until we're left with one key pressed down on the saxophone. So we're going to start off with 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the lowest of the two keys. Then that's going to give us low C. Then remove the lowest of the keys. That will give us D. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Remove the lowest key. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That will give us E. Then remove the lowest key. 1, 2, 3, 1. That will give us F. And then remove the lowest key. 1, 2, 3. That will give us G. Then remove the lowest key. That will give us 1 and 2, which will give us A. and then remove the lowest key. That will give us 1, which will give us B. And then from there, all we're going to do is just press down the second key, number 2, in the left hand, and that will give us C. So we start here, and then we just remove the lowest key one at a time till we're left with 1 key, press down, and then we press the key underneath that key to give us C. So now we ended with the second key pressed in, which is C. So now we got to start with D. And so what we're going to do, we're going to do all of those fingerings again, exactly the same, but we're going to start with D. But this time we're going to press in the octave key. So we're going to start with D, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then we're just going to remove the lowest key one at a time. So D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we'll press the key underneath this note, C. All those notes are played with the octave key. So we ended with this key pressed down, which is C, and now we need to move on to D. So this time when we play D, we got to go into the palm keys. So remember that this key here is the D key. So we're going to press that one down. Then we go to E, which is this palm key and that palm key, and the top side key to give us E. And then for F, we're going to press down the remaining palm key. So now that we've played the C major scale, starting from low C right up to the top F, then we've got to do everything in reverse and come all the way back down to low C. And as you remember, low C was 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, plus the lowest of the 2 keys. From there, we need to go even lower and play low B. To play low B, you keep the same fingerings of low C, but you also press in this key with your left hand pinky finger, this key here. Hold that in will give you B, then release it will take you back up to the root to low C. So from low C to B and then back to low C. So now you play the C major scale over the entire range of the saxophone. The following fingerings for the major scales will follow the circle of fifths. So once you've learned a scale, then the next scale to learn will only be changed by 1 note. When playing the scales that have B flat in it, what we usually do is keep our finger over the B and the bis key and press them down together when playing the notes of that scale. The reason for that is because when you're playing a lot of the notes of that scale, the bis key goes down anyway. So keeping our finger over the bis key means that we do not need to keep on rolling our finger from the B to the bis key and then rolling it back. Finger charts for these scales will not show the bis key being colored except for the B flat note. But since when you play these other notes, the bis key goes down anyway, it's good to use this tip of pressing down the bis key whenever the B key is pressed down. There are three types of minor scales: the natural minor, harmonic minor, and melodic minor. If we have learned our major scales, then the natural minor scales will be easy to learn since they have the same notes as the major scales. The only difference being that we start the natural minor scale on the 6th degree of the major scale. So here is the C major scale. Now if I start this scale on the 6th degree and continue up the scale ending on the note of the 6th degree, then I would have played the A natural minor. Each major scale has its own relative minor scale which uses the same notes of the scale and therefore the same key signature. The harmonic minor is similar to the natural minor, the difference being that we raise the 7th note of the natural minor by a half tone or semitone. The melodic minor has a raised 6th and 7th note of the natural minor scale ascending and has the same notes of the natural minor descending. So there is one scale going up and another scale coming down, although some may play the same scale ascending as descending. If we have learned the chromatic scale, then we know all the fingerings of every note on the saxophone, and therefore we should be able to play these minor scales. Here they are written out. Another scale that musicians like to use is the pentatonic scale. There is a major and minor pentatonic scale. To play the major pentatonic scale, simply play the major scale but without the 4th and 7th note. It is the 4th and 7th note out of all of the notes of the major scale that are likely to clash with other notes when played over a chord. So if they are not played, then we have a scale whose notes can be played in any order over any chord and still sound good. The pentatonic scale is used a lot for improvising. If we play the notes of the pentatonic scale starting from the 6th note, then we have the minor pentatonic scale. Or the minor pentatonic scale can be derived from the natural minor scale by removing the 2nd and 6th note of that scale. It is probably best just to memorize these scales rather than learning how to work them out from other scales. The sheet music for a piano consists of a full musical staff with a treble clef and bass clef. However, since the range of the saxophone is considerably smaller, the sheet music for the four main types of saxophones are written on the treble clef only, which consists of 5 lines. From playing the major scales, we would have realized that the notes that fall in the spaces of these 5 lines spell out the word face, and the notes that fall in the lines can be worked out from the sentence, "Every good boy deserves favor." Since there are only 5 lines in a staff, if we want to write notes above and below the staff, we have to draw an extra little line called a ledger line. So the note below the lowest line of the staff is D. Then we draw a ledger line for low C, then B is written below that line. Above the 5 lines is G, then we draw a line for A, then B, then another line for C. We can continue like this past F into the altissimo range of the saxophone. Now while this happens in some sheet music, because working out the pitch of these notes with a lot of ledger lines can be confusing, we can use a shorthand method when writing these high notes. We write the notes an octave below their true pitch and indicate that they should be played an octave above by writing AVA with a bracket showing which notes this applies to. This makes it easier to read. We can also write 15 VA to indicate that the note should be played 2 octaves higher. To hear a song using altissimo notes, check out El Bostic's song Up There in Orbit. Any notes can be raised or lowered by a half step or semitone by writing a sharp or flat in front of the note. This will be equivalent to playing the black notes on a piano. We would have seen this when playing through the major scales. Some notes can be called by 2 names which we call enharmonic. So for example, D flat can also be called C sharp, E flat can be called D sharp, F can be called E sharp, G flat can be called F sharp, A flat can be called G sharp, B flat can be called A sharp, and C flat can be called B. The musical staff is divided into bars or measures by bars or measure lines. These bars are sometimes numbered so that sections can be easily found. At the beginning of the sheet music, after the treble clef, is the key signature. This is a shorthand way of letting us know which notes should be played as flats or sharps. For example, the key signature that has 1 flat, B flat, is the key signature of F, and means that all of the B's written in the music must be played as B flat unless otherwise indicated. Since this is indicated by the key signature, it means that we do not have to keep on writing flats before every B in the sheet music. The key signature that has 2 sharps is the key signature for D and indicates that all Fs and all Cs must be played as F sharps and C sharps unless otherwise indicated. There are other signs called accidentals of which sharps and flats are a part. A natural sign can change a note to its natural note. So it can change an F sharp to an F and an E flat to an E. A note that has been raised by a half tone can be raised again by another half tone by using a double sharp sign, and a note that has been lowered by a half tone can be lowered again by another half tone by using a double flat sign. The flats and sharps in the key signature affects all of the notes in the music unless another key signature is inserted. However, the sharps and flats used as accidentals, that is, additional sharps and flats outside of the key signature, only affects the notes on the lines and spaces where the accidental is present and is cancelled by the bar line. After the key signature is the time signature, and this tells us how many beats there are to the bar and the duration of those beats. There are many different types of time signatures, of which here are a few. Notes come in different forms. Some will have a hollow oval shape, others will have a black oval shape with a stem, while others would have the addition of one or more tails. Each of these types of notes indicate how long they should be played in relation to each other and to the tempo of the music. Each note will also have its equivalent rest note where there is appearance of silence in the melody. Let's now examine these notes and rests in 4/4 time and in 3/4 time in order to get a fuller understanding how the length of notes work before learning to play some songs. Here are the combinations of some of the note types we will encounter as a beginner. The first note is called a whole note, also called a semi-breve, and lasts the whole bar in 4/4 time. So if we count the beats as 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the whole note will sound over the 4 beats. The next symbol hanging from the 4th line is its equivalent rest, so for 4 beats there will be no melody sound. The next note is called a half note, also called a minim. It lasts 2 beats, and therefore 2 of these notes can fit in the bar in 4/4 time. Each of these notes will be held for 2 beats. In the next bar we see the equivalent half note rest. So here we play the first note for 2 beats and then rest for 2 beats. Notice that the rest note sits on the 3rd line to avoid confusion with the whole note rest. The next note is a quarter note, also called a crotchet, and therefore 4 of them can fit in the bar. So we play this type of note on every beat. In the next bar we can see the equivalent quarter note rest. The next note is called an 8th note. We count the bar as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. These notes are played half the length of a quarter note. Here are the same notes again with their equivalent rest notes. The next notes are 16th notes, also called semiquavers. There are 4 notes to every beat. We count them as 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and. In the next bar we have the same notes with their equivalent rest. In the next bar we come across the triplet. Here we have an 8th note triplet, but we can form triplets with any type of note. Here we would play 3 notes in the time of 2 of the same notes. So we are fitting in an extra note in the timing. We can count this as 1 a day, 2 a day, 3 a day, 4 a day, as if saying the word Saturday. The next bar shows a smaller triplet. Once we've learnt the length of these notes and rests and how to count them, we can work out the timings of any sheet music. We'll probably be playing songs in 4/4 time, as this is a common time signature, but let's now consider 3/4 time. Here the notes keep the same length value as in 4/4 time, but now in 3/4 time there is a beat missing, so less notes will fit into the bar. We count the bar as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The first note is a half note with a dot after it. A note with a dot after it is called a dotted note and lasts 1.5 times the normal note. So here a half note lasts 2 beats, and so a dotted half note will last 3 beats, that is 1.5 times the normal note. And since we are in 3/4 time, the dotted half note will last the whole bar or 3 beats. The next symbol is a whole bar rest. In 4/4 time, it lasted 4 beats. Here it lasts 3 beats. In other words, it lasts the whole bar. In the next bar, we have a half note which lasts 2 beats, and so there is only enough space to fit in another quarter note in the bar. So immediately we come to the conclusion that a half note in 4/4 time lasts half of the bar, but in 3/4 time it doesn't. It is therefore better to think of these notes in terms of how many quarter notes they are worth. So in 4/4 time, a half note is worth 2 quarter notes, and in 3/4 time, a half note is worth the same, 2 quarter notes. In the next bar, we have 2 quarter note rests. The quarter note rests are used instead of a half note rest, since it's easier to see the subdivisions of the beats. Next we have a half note and a quarter note rest. Next we have a quarter note rest and 2 quarter notes. Next we have 3 quarter notes that fill up the bar in 3/4 time. And another quarter note and rest combination. This should all be making sense now. So here we have 6 eighth notes that fill up the bar. In the next bar we have the eighth note rest. In the next few bars we have 16th notes in triplets. We should have also seen that notes are linked together in groups according to the beat by beams, which helps us to define where the beats are and how the notes fit within the beats. There are some other smaller length notes and symbols which we will encounter when we go into playing some songs. When playing a few notes one after another, there are 2 ways how we can do this. We can either tongue the first note to give it a clean start, and then play all of the following notes on one breath, and then tongue the last note to give it a clean end to the note. This way of playing is called legato and creates a smooth transition from one note to the next. It is shown in sheet music by a slur marking over the notes. The other way is to tongue all or some of the notes. Here we would tongue the start and ending of the notes so that each note has a clean start and ending as opposed to smoothly merging into each other. We still play these notes on a single breath, but we interrupt the sound briefly by tonguing. In sheet music where there are slur markings, the notes without the slur markings would be tongued. Another way of playing notes is to play them staccato, indicated in sheet music by a dot above the notes. Here the notes are tongued, but are played shorter than are written. So let's consider how to tongue a note. The last method described is the method that I use, where the tip of the tongue is anchored where the lower teeth meet the gum. Some people tongue the note with the tip of their tongue just under the tip of the reed. Here the action is mainly from the tip of the tongue, so the rest of the tongue is stationary. So to start the note, you place the tip of your tongue just under the tip of the reed so it cannot vibrate. Make sure that it's near the tip of the reed so that no squeaks are produced. Then you start blowing to build up some air pressure. Then you release the tip of your tongue, which will cause the reed to start to vibrate immediately and create the sound. Then to stop the note, you place the tip of your tongue back on the reed in the same position, which will stop the reed from vibrating and stop the sound. It is argued by those that use this method that using only the tip of your tongue will help when playing notes faster. Also, because it's just the tip that is mainly moving, you are not changing your oral cavity a lot, so the space within your mouth remains virtually the same, and therefore you are not changing the dynamics of the sound. Also, since you are only using the tip of your tongue, this creates a cleaner start and stop to the notes so that the notes do not sound muffled. Notice that the airflow is constantly flowing through the saxophone, and the use of the tongue is merely to stop the reed vibrating rather than to stop the airflow. When playing a succession of tongued notes, the tongue should quickly and lightly touch the reed. This is the best way to get the same consistency between the notes. Some people may close off the mouthpiece when they tongue a note. This will stop the airflow. This would have the effect of creating a strongly tongued note, which you will hear as opposed to lightly touching the reed. Others will lightly touch the reed in such a way so that the reed still vibrates but the sound is dampened when tonguing between notes. You would have to experiment with how much pressure you want to apply to the reed when you tongue. Whether you want to close off the mouthpiece and stop the airflow, or touch the reed to stop it vibrating while keeping the airflow, which is better, or to lightly touch the reed so that the reed still vibrates but the sound is dampened just before playing the next note. But remember, the whole point of tonguing is to stop the sound, not necessarily the airflow. Another way of tonguing a note is to position the tip of the tongue down by the teeth and to raise the tongue so somewhere further back on the tongue touches the tip of the reed. So again, here you start with the tongue touching the tip of the reed so that it will not vibrate. Then you build up the air pressure by blowing, and when ready, you lower your tongue so that the reed will start vibrating. To stop the reed again, you raise your tongue until it touches the reed again and stops it vibrating. Another way of tonguing is to do the same as just mentioned, but this time the tip of the tongue is anchored somewhere at the base of the teeth and stays there. This will be difficult to do by those who have short tongues. So that was a few ways of tonguing used by musicians, and each will have their own advantages and disadvantages. Now let's start by playing a simple song, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It is in 4/4 time, the key signature is C, and the notes are only quarter notes and half notes. So all the quarter notes are played on the beat and will last for 1 click of the metronome, and the half notes last for 2 clicks of the metronome. Once we have played this, then play the same thing but in the key of F and D. Remember, when playing in the key of F, all Bs are to be played as B flats, and when playing in the key of D, all Fs and Cs are to be played as sharps. So now let's look at the first few lines of a more complicated song and work out the timings. This song is Against the Odds, played by Gerald Albright. Looking at the music, we see that the song is in the key of C because there are no sharps or flats indicated. The time signature is 4/4, meaning there will be 4 beats to the bar, with each beat worth a quarter note. The number 6 on the long line simply means that there are 6 bars, and since there are no notes shown, it means that this does not apply to us. We start on the following bar, bar 7. We know that the spaces in the line spell out the word face, and the lines are E, G, B, D, F from the sentence, every good boy deserves favour. We can work out the rest of the notes by counting up or down. The first 4 notes are eighth notes and so counted 1 and 2 and. The next note is a dotted note, and as we know, a dotted note lasts 1.5 times the normal note. So this note will start on count 3 and the following note halfway between the and 4. In fact, we need to play 2 short notes here. This may be easier to see if we line up the notes according to the duration of the notes. So this note lasts 1.5 times the normal duration, leaving the space for 2 30-second notes. The 2 last notes are eighth notes and are played on 4 and the and of 4. So here we can see how the quarter notes, the eighth notes, the 16th notes and 32nd notes fit within a bar of 4/4 time and how the melody uses these notes. The only difficulty here is anticipating when to start the 32nd notes. The last note is tied to the following note with a tie symbol linking the notes. This means that both notes sound as one note for the combined duration. 2 eighth notes equal a quarter note, but we cannot write a single note that would extend over the bar, so we have to write 2 notes with a tie marking. So the note is held into count 1 of the next bar and the next note is on the and. Now we come to a very small note with a line through it. This is a grace note and is to be played quickly into the following notes. So the following note starts on count 2, so on count 2 we quickly play the grace note followed by the main note. The main note lasts a beat and we have an eighth note rest followed by 3 eighth notes. The next bar has 8 eighth notes in which the last eighth note is held for an extra half note duration. Then we have a quarter note rest, which would be count 3, followed by 2 eighth notes. Going back, we see we have some grace notes. Be careful of the accidentals. Remember, if a note is raised by a sharp sign, then a natural sign restores the note. Notes with a little dot above them indicate that those notes should be played staccato, meaning shorter than written. So here the staccato notes are played about half of the written value. The last bar of the line is the most difficult as it contains 30-second note triplets. The 3 30-second notes of the triplet must be played in a duration of 2 30-second notes, or in other words, in a duration of a 16th note. So we start on count 1 with a quickly played grace note. This grace note is played into the main note which lasts a beat. Then on count 2 we play the first triplet. Then the next note, which is a dotted note, will be played until the start of count 3. It is held into the first note of the second triplet and the last note of the triplet is held until the start of count 4. And then we play 2 eighth notes to the end of the bar. This may be easier to see if we line up all the notes. I've reduced the size of the triplets so all of the notes line up. Remember that these triplets are to be played in the duration of a 60th note. It will be easier just to hear the song and then copy it rather than trying to work out the timings, but sometimes we do not have a recording and we have to read the sheet music. So the last note of the bar is held for an extra 8th note duration. Remember that these are not 2 notes but 1 note played for the combined duration. Then another grace note into an 8th note followed by a half note. Then we have an 8th note rest followed by 2 16th notes. From here we have 4 8th notes with the last held for another 8th note duration. Then another grace note into an 8th note which is held for an extra 16th note duration. Then 2 32nd notes followed by 2 16th notes and a half note. So we should be able to by now work out the notes of any song and its timing. The difficulty in playing the song is judging the timings of the smaller notes, the triplets and the tied notes. But once we hear the song, it will make everything a lot easier.